He hasn't even crossed half court. And then he jumps up in the air and throws a pass with topspin. It goes 3/4 of the court, hits the ground, and catches somebody in stride that catches it and lays it up. I was like, people ask me about so many things these days. Most of all, they ask about the skyhook. They ask about the championships in Milwaukee and Los Angeles. They want to know what it was like playing with Magic Johnson, facing Larry Bird, battling Wilt Chamberlain, or just carrying those massive expectations every single year. It feels like every interview eventually circles back to the exact same moments, games, and trophies. Honestly, I understand why. Those are the moments people will always remember. But recently, someone asked me a question that made me stop. Kareem, who are the 5 greatest NBA players you have ever seen? Believe me, that is a much tougher question than people tend to think. Most fans hear the word greatest and immediately start counting up championships, MVP awards, scoring titles, or all-star appearances. Some folks focus on statistics, others look solely at rings. That is completely reasonable. Those things matter, and they always will. But after spending my whole life around this game, my definition has shifted. To me, greatness is not just about what a player accomplished. It is how they transformed basketball and how they changed the people around them. How they forced teammates to step up, forced opponents to prepare differently, and even made coaches completely rethink everything they believed about the game. A few of the players I am about to mention dominated through sheer talent. Others did it with intellect, leadership, or an almost impossible will to win. Every one of them left the league different from how they found it. This is not a ranking. These are simply 5 players who, in one way or another, completely changed how I understood what true greatness really looks like. The first man who comes to my mind is someone who proved that basketball could be won just as much with the mind as with the body. Let us start with Larry Bird. I can still vividly remember the first time I watched him closely, not on television and not through newspaper headlines. I mean, watching him directly from the other end of the floor. After just a few quick possessions, I thought to myself, this man understands the game of basketball in a completely different way. He was not the quickest player I had ever faced, and he certainly was not the highest jumper. He did not overwhelm you with raw athletic ability, but somehow he always managed to arrive exactly where the play was going, not where it already was. That takes something you cannot teach. It takes pure instinct. It takes patience, and it takes a basketball mind that only comes around once in a generation. People love to talk about Larry's shooting. They remember those clutch shots, his absolute confidence, and the legendary trash talk. And yes, all of that was incredibly real. But what impressed me most was not necessarily the shot that actually went in. It was everything that happened before he even released the ball. He had already read the defense and already saw the help coming. He had already mapped out where the next pass would go if the shot was not there. That is basketball at its highest level. I always appreciated players who could truly think the game. Larry did not just think it, he seemed to actually slow it down. Every single time we played Boston in those finals, you knew you could not relax for even a brief moment. Not for a single possession, because Larry had a way of punishing your smallest mistake. Maybe someone rotated half a second late. Maybe a defender glanced away. Maybe a rebound bounced slightly farther than expected. Larry noticed every single bit of it. Before you even realized what happened, he had already turned it into 2 points. That is what made preparing for Boston so exhausting. You were not just preparing for their plays. You were preparing for Larry Bird's decisions. Naturally, people always remember the intense rivalry between Magic and Larry. They said that rivalry helped lift the entire NBA to another level. It made every single finals feel bigger, every possession much heavier, and I was fortunate enough to be right in the middle of it. Honestly, I believe both of our teams became better simply because the other existed. Iron sharpens iron. That is an old saying, but basketball works the exact same way. After all these years, when I think of Larry Bird, I do not immediately think of championships, MVP trophies, or statistics. I think of preparation and respect and sheer intelligence, because every single time you played against him, he forced you to become a smarter basketball player. To me, that is one of the clearest signs of true greatness. Looking back now, the next man is someone I admired long before I ever had the opportunity to compete against him, Bill Russell. When I was growing up in New York, Russell was not just another great player. he represented something much bigger than that. He represented winning. He represented dignity. He represented leadership. And for a young center trying to learn the game, that left a lasting impression. People always bring up those 11 championships, and honestly, they should. Nobody wins that many championships by accident, but those titles do not fully explain Bill Russell, not even close. What separated him, at least in my eyes, was how he mastered defense. Most guys saw defending as a chore. Bill Russell treated defense like an art form. He was not just trying to swat shots into the stands. He wanted his squad to secure the ball. Sometimes he would tip it to a teammate, and sometimes he altered shots without even touching them. Honestly, sometimes his mere presence made opponents hesitate. That is the kind of impact statistics could never fully capture. As I finally got to know Bill personally over the years, I realized something vital. The player on the hardwood was remarkable. Yet the man was even more incredible. He carried immense pressure throughout his entire career. This was not just because people expected him to win, but because of everything he faced off the court, and yet he never let bitterness define him. He constantly carried himself with deep intelligence, strong principle, and unwavering self-respect. I admired that deeply. Since Bill retired just before I entered the NBA, we never actually got to play against each other. People often assume we battled on the court. We did not. But that never changed how much I learned just by watching him. I would study how he anticipated plays, how he communicated defensively, and how his teammates trusted him with their lives. Those Celtics teams were not successful simply because they had one great scorer. They won because Russell convinced everyone that winning together mattered far more than any individual recognition. That is true leadership. As my own career moved forward, I found myself thinking about Bill more and more, particularly during the tough seasons. He constantly reminded me that greatness is not always measured by what you score, but sometimes by what you prevent. Sometimes it is measured by the deep confidence your teammates feel simply because you are standing right beside them. That is much harder to quantify, but it is just as valuable. When I think of Bill Russell today, I do not picture those championship banners first. Instead, I picture a man who changed the very definition of what an NBA center could be: a defender, a leader, an ultimate teammate, and someone who proved that lifting others up can be the greatest basketball talent of all. Even today, the game of basketball has never fully moved past the standard he set. Now, the next man I want to discuss is Wilt Chamberlain. People have compared me to Wilt Chamberlain for most of my life, and I suppose that matchup was inevitable. We were two centers with completely different styles, representing different generations trying to prove themselves. By the time I entered the league, Wilt had established a reputation that sounded almost mythical. You would hear about 100 points or 50 points a game. All of those insane rebounding records honestly did not even sound real until you actually saw him play. Once you stood across from him on the court, suddenly every single story made perfect sense. Wilt was easily one of the most physically gifted athletes I have ever seen in any sport, not just basketball. He stood bigger than almost everyone. He was stronger than almost everyone, yet he moved with unbelievable speed. That rare combination simply was not normal. I quickly realized that trying to overpower Wilt Chamberlain on the block was a total waste of time. Very few guys ever pulled that off. But what impressed me even more was how much he evolved over time. People remember his scoring, and I get why. Those numbers will likely never be matched again. But later in his career, Wilt transformed into a completely different player. He focused on defense, rebounding, and protecting the rim. He passed the ball much better than people remember, becoming whatever his team needed. That takes real maturity. I respected that. Our matchups in the early 1970s were incredibly demanding. Every single game was physical, and every rebound had to be earned. There was never an easy possession. You always had to know exactly where Wilt was on the floor at all times. Even without the ball in his hands, his presence changed the game. Your offense changed, your defense shifted, and your decisions were different. Very few players have ever had that level of influence. Another thing people often overlook is his sheer durability. Wilt played heavy minutes night after night, season after season, in a highly physical era, yet he rarely ever looked tired. He simply kept pushing. There is a quiet discipline behind that, and it never happens by accident. As I grew older, I found myself appreciating that specific quality more and more, because raw talent might get you into the league, but discipline keeps you there. When I think about Wilt today, I do not focus on competing against his records. Instead, I think about competing against his standard. He forced every center who followed him to raise their expectations, including me. Whether we liked it or not, we all measured our own careers against what Wilt had already accomplished. That is a truly legendary legacy. Ultimately, greatness is not just about what you achieve. Sometimes it is about raising the bar of expectation for everyone who follows. Wilt Chamberlain did exactly that, and the game of basketball has been chasing his standard ever since. Naturally, my thoughts then turned to Magic Johnson. People always ask me what it was like to share the court with Magic. I usually just smile because honestly, it is hard to explain unless you actually live through it. Even before he played his first NBA game, the hype around him was unreal. He was fresh off winning the national championship at Michigan State, carrying this incredible charisma and pure confidence. People noticed him the second he stepped into any room. But once he walked into our locker room and we had a few practices, it clicked. This kid saw the court on a completely different level. Magic was never looking for the obvious pass. Instead, he hunted for the play nobody else could even imagine. There were times I thought I was totally covered. Next thing I knew, the ball would hit my hands perfectly, right where I needed it. That is a truly rare gift. Look, plenty of elite point guards can run an offense, but Magic dictated the entire rhythm of the game. If we had to run, we ran. If we needed to be patient, he would put on the brakes. He had this amazing way of making everyone feel connected. Every single guy on the floor believed the next pass was coming to them, and that completely transforms a team. It forces everybody to play harder, and I respected that above all else. Sure, people remember the famous smile, his personality, and that joy, and all of that was absolutely real. But beneath that grin lived one of the most ruthless competitors to ever play. Magic hated losing. He flat out refused to accept defeat. One memory that will always stay with me happened back during the 1980 NBA Finals. I was sidelined for Game 6 with a bad ankle sprain. Now, most rookies would have been totally overwhelmed by that moment. Not Magic. He started at center, played literally every position, and finished with 42 points, 15 rebounds, and 7 assists. We won the title, but that game was not just spectacular. It proved something deep about his character. When his team needed him to shift roles, he never hesitated for a second. That is leadership. Over the years, we built a level of trust that you just cannot rush. I knew if I got to my spot, he would find me, and he trusted that I would be ready. You simply cannot build that kind of chemistry on raw talent alone. It comes from endless practices, deep conversations, and hours spent mapping out each other's natural instincts. Looking back on it, I do not believe Magic changed the game just because he was 6'9" and played point guard. He revolutionized the sport by showing everyone that elevating your teammates is a true superstar skill. Sure, some guys make highlights. Other players make history. But Magic made everyone around him genuinely believe they could achieve more than they ever dreamed. Honestly, that is a rare, beautiful quality, and I was incredibly lucky to watch it unfold from just a few feet away. And finally, the one player who stands out above anyone else is Michael Jordan. By the time Michael hit his absolute prime, I was already winding down my own career, so I did not spend years going to war with him like I did with Wilt or Larry. But you did not need 20 seasons to recognize what you were watching. Greatness has a way of announcing itself fast, and Michael did just that. At first, everyone stared at his athleticism. It was breathtaking. The guy could hang in the air longer than seemed humanly possible, attacking the rim with absolutely zero fear. He made impossible shots look like routine warm-ups, but studying him closer, I realized that was not what truly separated him. His absolute deadliest weapon was his personal standard. Michael demanded perfection every single day. He expected it from himself first, and then from everyone else. That kind of mindset quickly infects an entire franchise. Teammates felt it, coaches felt it, even his opponents felt it. You knew long before tip-off that he intended to dominate, not because of what he said, but because he prepared for it. Look, the league has seen plenty of incredibly gifted scorers throughout NBA history. We have witnessed elite athletes, legendary shooters, and masterful passers. Michael somehow unified almost every element of the game. If his scoring failed, he would just defend. If defense was not enough, he would crash the glass. If a teammate had a cleaner look, he made the pass. He refused to step off that court without changing the game. I respected that. One trait I always admired was how much his game evolved over time. Sometimes people forget that championships did not come overnight. He faced real heartbreak, early playoff exits, and critics asking if his style could actually win. Rather than changing his identity, he simply expanded his game. He trusted his teammates more and played defense at an elite level. He became a better leader, and then the championships followed, 6 of them. That teaches a major lesson. Talent gets you inside, but growth keeps you there. Looking back at it today, Michael's legacy is about so much more than 6 championships or 5 MVP trophies. Those accolades speak for themselves, but his real legacy is the standard he set. Every single young player who followed him was measured differently. Every rising superstar was compared to him. Any debate about greatness eventually came right back to Michael Jordan. Truly rare are the athletes in any sport who actually redefined the conversation itself. Michael did. That is exactly why I believe he belongs here, not because he was perfect. No player ever is. He belongs here because he raised the bar for what basketball excellence could look like. And once the world saw that standard, it never lowered it again. When you have been around this game for as long as I have, you eventually realize something. This game has never really been about proving who was the greatest. People will always debate. One generation chooses their hero, the next chooses someone else, and that is perfectly fine. The game keeps moving forward just as it should. What stays with me is not the arguments, nor is it the rankings. It is the privilege of sharing the court with men who completely redefined what basketball could become. Bill Russell showed me that leadership can win championships. Wilt Chamberlain showed me that human potential reaches much farther than we think. Larry Bird reminded me that intelligence is every bit as powerful as raw athleticism. Magic Johnson showed me that making your teammates better is one of the highest forms of greatness. And Michael Jordan demonstrated what happens when extraordinary talent meets an absolutely relentless work ethic. Each of them changed this league. Each one changed me. Championships eventually fade into photographs, and trophies collect dust. Records are always meant to be broken. That is just the nature of sports, but respect endures. The lessons you learn from extraordinary competitors stay with you long after the final buzzer. I feel fortunate that basketball let me stand alongside these men. Not because we agreed on everything, and not because we all played the game the same way, but because each of them left the game stronger than they found it. If people remember me years from now, I hope it is not just because of the skyhook. I hope they remember that I love this game enough to never stop learning from the men who challenged it, transformed it, and carried it forward. Because in the end, that is the greatest legacy any of us can ever leave behind.